I have a bill that I'm seeking sponsorship for. The RS number is 25 RS 0746. It's referred to colloquially as the jailhouse snitch bill. It concerns crimes and punishments relating to jailhouse witnesses, testimony requiring prosecutors to disclose their intent to introduce testimony from a jailhouse witness and to forward related information to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. Any questions of me? Yes, 25 RS 0746. Seeing any objection? Seeing none, we will, this bill will go on to the floor for the speaker to consider. Do we have any requests from the floor for bill sponsorships? Okay, seeing none, before we get into our conferee for the day on law enforcement and so forth, I wanted to say that there are a number of people I know in the legislature that are sick these days, and in fact our committee has 3. So try and stay well, and hopefully we'll see them back soon. Okay, the next item of business is, I believe, is it Mr. Klump today, or are we, who's going to be the conferee? Okay. Well, welcome to committee in any case.
Ed Klump, representing the Kansas Sheriff's Association, Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Kansas Peace Officers Association. We actually have a representative for each one of the associations that'll go up and speak. We have one piece of written testimony, and they're going to go in the order of, I believe, Sheriff Easter first, and then Chief Atterbury, and then finally Lieutenant Greenwood. Almost said Lieutenant Tim. So they'll go in that order, sir.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Is it Sheriff Easterbrook first, or no? I'm sorry.
Good afternoon, legislators. Appreciate the opportunity for the 3 associations to come and speak to you today. We've done this the last couple of years of this particular committee. I know there's some new members. We've submitted written testimony on behalf of the Kansas Association of Chiefs of Police, Sheriff's Association, the Kansas Peace Officers Association. One of the things that we really want to outline is a lot of folks kind of classify the crimes that we have here in this state as violent and nonviolent crimes. One of the things, the nonviolent crimes still have an impact on the citizens of Kansas. And we're seeing a lot more of the nonviolent crimes. When you're talking about scams, frauds, those type of things, we've seen a huge uptick in those type of areas. That doesn't say anything about our violent crime. Of course, that's what generally most of the media and everybody really pays attention to within the state. Although we've seen some slight declines in violent crime, we're still not at the levels of 5 years ago. Today, we see news articles from across the nation of the impact of property crimes on the future of businesses and neighborhoods. Businesses that are closing in abandoned neighborhoods because of shoplifting cases in neighborhoods that no longer feel safe from extreme financial losses from thefts, such as the stealing of automobiles and other critical need items. I will tell you, in Sedgwick County, that's where I'm the sheriff at, we get a lot of citizens that are not happy with the amount of nonviolent crimes, so those property type crimes. A lot of those, if you don't know, it will take 3 separate burglary convictions if you have nothing else on your record to even go to prison. When you explain that to the citizens, they're not happy about it. And some of these folks have extensive records of property crimes. The next topic I want to talk about is the offender registration statewide system. As you may or may not know, KSORT is what governs or the infrastructure, the database, which all sheriffs use for the offender registration program. That was developed by KBI years ago when the laws were passed. It's very old, antiquated, and is very hard to use at this point. There are companies out there that now provide software that is a lot easier to maneuver through, a lot easier for input, and a lot of user-friendly information at the back end of it. The KBI director, Tony Mativi, has asked for funding in his budget request for a new software system. The easiest way I can explain it to you is with the K-sort system, if you remember what teletypes look like, the information looks like a teletype. And somewhere in there is information that we need, but we have to read the several pages of teletype. In these new systems, currently the sheriff's office uses a system that has all the information like you would look at a regular computer screen with photos, everything that we need to know about them. And the really nice thing about it is we have to enter it one time, and it hits NCIC, it hits everything else. Right now, we have to, because K-sort doesn't enter right into NCIC, so we have to enter twice. The other thing about it is if one of our offenders gets arrested, say in Oklahoma City, with that particular program, it notifies us immediately that one of our offenders has been arrested in another jurisdiction. And at that point, we can file the paperwork with the judge to hold them in violation of their Offender Registration Act. And then we go down and pick them up. That doesn't take place in the K-sort system. So if you have any opportunity, I'll be very happy to answer any other questions because it's a very robust system. It's a very good system for the citizens of the state of Kansas. If you have any other questions, please ask me because we've been trying to work on this for about 4 years now. And I appreciate the fact that KBI Director Mativi is interested in updating that system. Another bill KSA is going to look at introducing is a jail liability bill. So in KSA 19.811, the language reads, shall keep such jail himself or by his deputy or jailer for whose acts he or his surety shall be liable. In another statute, KSA 19.805, says for whose official acts the sheriff is responsible. For the sheriff and sureties of the sheriff shall be responsible of the official bond and of the sheriff. The difference there is the official acts. And so, we ran into a situation where we had a deputy that received some sexual favors inside the jail. Of course, he was charged, fired, convicted, went to prison. We went through a civil lawsuit, and I won't bore you with all those facts. But the one statute of 1811, because it doesn't say official acts, is problematic. Receiving sexual favors in a jail is not an official act. They're not trained to do that or anything else. And so we're going to be requesting that those two statutes mirror each other. The last thing that I have from the Sheriff's Association is the mental health concerns. As you know, for several years we've been talking about the mental health aspect in the state of Kansas, the lack of resources, those type of things. There has been some stopgaps put into place that have assisted. So contracting with different hospitals for additional beds, those type of things. Has it solved everything? No, not even close. Has it been a stopgap? Yes. We still have long waiting times at Larned for folks that are in sheriff's custody that need to be seen for evaluation or treatment. We still have long wait times at Osawatomie. The other problem is a lot of these folks that have been committed by a judge order also have medical issues, which means they languished in the hospital and at a local hospital until those particular medical issues are, lack of a better term, fixed before they can go and get treatment for their mental health. So those are still issues that are taking place. One good thing is you all have allocated money for an additional mental health hospital that's going to be in the South Central region, which will also serve the South Central region. There's about 20% of the population at Osawatomie and a little over 20% of the population at Larned that come from Sedgwick County alone. And so by adding that additional hospital, we'll relieve the rest of the state of Kansas so that western Kansas or eastern Kansas can ship their folks to Larned or Osawatomie without the wait lines being as long. So that's a huge plus, and but that's not until end of '26. And so in the meantime, you know, we also see media reports and hear some legislators talk about people held in jails without criminal charges while on the waiting list for the state hospital beds. That's absolutely not true. There are state statutes out there that they have to be in our custody for a criminal act or we can't hold them. And so as soon as they're released on that criminal act, we can no longer hold them by state statute. The problems that you have with this is especially in western Kansas, where there's not a lot of resources, not a lot of hospitals, they have to figure out where to keep these folks that have commitment orders while they're waiting for Osawatomie or Larned to get a bed, which means they usually have to keep a deputy on this person for 24 hours a day, either at a hotel room or an office somewhere in the sheriff's office. Those stories are still true and they're still taking place. They're not taking place as much as they used to be, but they still take place. And so those are some of the problematic things that we find. Again, the emergency commitment process is getting a little better, but there's still a lot of problems. And, you know, the backlog of competency evaluations and restoration, I have about 16 inmates that are waiting for that to be done at Larned, one of which has been waiting about 325 days. So if you're not familiar with how that works, luckily for us, our local ComCare does about 70% of our evaluations, but there's some folks that they simply can't do it, and we have to have the state do those type of evaluations. They're put on a list, then they go and get evaluated, then they're placed back into the jail, and they get put on a list again for restoration. And so again, I think with the additional mental health hospital, I think it will relieve a lot of those particular issues. And so with that, if there's no questions that you have of me right now, I'll turn it over to Chief Haynes, who will cover some of the issues the KACP would like to discuss. Hey, I'm sorry, different Darrell, Chief Atterbury. So thank you.
Yeah, that would be fine. I think we'll wait questions for all the conferees at the same time. So welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chairman, committee. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you today. I'm going to speak about mental health of employees. One of the things that we've been concerned about for years, especially since the 21st century policing report by the Biden administration, is wellness of officers and our employees generally, but specifically our police officers. Now, as I say this, I also want to let you know that we're concerned about our firemen, firefighters, and EMTs. We don't want to leave them out because they experience the same things that we do. It is something that we've looked at for years. I commend KLETC. They have developed many courses that is directed at mental health for officers. They've contracted with outside sources to assist officers in dealing with some of the things we see on a daily basis. So one of our concerns is PTSD can be treated here in the state of Kansas, but that is only if it is accompanied by an injury. Okay, if I'm injured severely in the line of duty and I'm treated for that, I can also be treated for PTSD, but not if I was only a witness to an event. We're asking that you consider legislation that would move post-traumatic stress disorder to a covered issue for officers and firefighters and EMTs to be able to take advantage of. Because many of the things that we see impact us, they're unobservable, but they still exist. And they can impact an officer's or a firefighter's or an EMT's ability to continue doing their job. And in today's world, when recruiting and retention is so difficult, trying to find new people to replace a person who just with some treatment could have continued their job, that's not a smart smart way to do business. We want to retain that employee if we can, and by moving PTSD onto that work comp, being able to handle it through our system so that we can retain that employee, it's the best case scenario for us. That would be done through legislation, and we would support the legislation would be to have a trained licensed psychologist, psychiatrist to make a determination whether that first responder's ability to recover from post-traumatic stress disorder will happen or not. And then we can take action from there. Another thing that I'd like to speak about is our fentanyl crisis. It is continuing. It has not really waned. It's just not on the headlines as much as it used to be. The legislature has done many things in past sessions, over the last few sessions, to deal with the fentanyl crisis. Because we have a lot of concerns, but one of our concerns, primary concerns, is our young people. Some of them make bad decisions and they buy pills from friends or friends of friends, and they think they're getting a Xanax or a Percocet. And these days, with the presses that the bad guys are using, those pills look authentic. They look real. So instead of getting a Percocet or a Xanax or whatever their pill of choice is, they're getting a counterfeit pill that's been laced with fentanyl. And then the results are terrible. So what we're asking is that as you enter into your deliberations about many bills that are going to come before you, is that you focus on education. How can we educate the public on the dangers of fentanyl and illegal drugs generally, but specifically fentanyl? We want you to consider rehabilitation sources. Right now, I've got a daughter who's a therapist, and the system is strained with family therapies, with drug therapy. There are just not enough therapists out there, and this has been a burden for therapists across the state. The ability to identify when somebody needs therapy and then in a timely manner get them into some therapy so that they can be helped, that's important. We don't want to delay that, so we want to ask for some consideration on anything that will come before you that will help with that situation. And then a third thing is, and specifically we would like you to consider revisions to the KSA 65, I believe that's KSR. It's from the State Board of Pharmacy. It's 68-7-23, and that was put into place when Narcan, the antagonist for opioids, was first brought out. It was a prescription drug, and it's no longer a prescription drug, but it's still in statute that we have to go through certain steps before we can authorize our officers to use it. We would ask that those parts of that bill, that regulation be removed, and that we be released from having a sponsoring doctor and the reporting of that, because we report the uses in our cases now. But we would ask that the protections that are still in that bill, using it in good faith, that type of thing, remain. Okay. And then I would move on to protecting the public from known, convicted, and accused offenders. We still have a problem with a lot of people, at least in South Central Kansas, being released into the Sedgwick County area for post-treatment and work release. And I know, because Representative Carmichael and I have talked about it in the past, that other places are being considered and constructed. But I just want you to keep that in your thoughts as you make decisions on that really disparate number that are released in the Wichita, Sedgwick County area versus those in the Northeast or any other part of the state. Firearms continue to be a concern, and While the majority of people are lawful owners of firearms, they're used to protect their rights, we would ask that you be firm and considerate to those people who do not use them in a lawful way. And if a bill comes before you regarding penalties for the illegal use of a firearm, that you send a message that illegal use of a firearm by criminals is not going to be stood for in the state of Kansas. The last thing I'm going to speak about is the real-time vehicle liability insurance data access. I've had a request. I had a request over the break in the session to consider this, and it's mandatory liability insurance is required in 47 to 50 states. And the reporting programs, often referred to as state reporting systems, they're designed so that you have a way to enforce compulsory laws in 23 states. There are always going to be citizens who try to thwart. They don't want to have insurance for one reason or another. But that's a non-compliance issue, and we deal with that through citations and that type of thing. But one of the concerns we have is those people who don't have insurance, when we come in contact with them, for instance, during a crash, they can have an insurance card that says they have insurance, but it lapsed last week. They didn't pay. They paid with a bad check, any number of things. So that's not good insurance, but they've given us a valid card. This would help us to go into the system, call the dispatcher, have them check to see if that insurance is actually valid, so that if it's not, we can cite that person for that violation. Nobody likes being in a wreck with an uninsured motorist. Nobody does. So this is a way that we would ask that you give us a tool to use so that we can do proper enforcement in that situation. But I would ask that it be done maybe through the insurance companies and not necessarily through the state of Kansas. We shouldn't be on the hook for that. I think the insurance companies, since they have that information, should be able to create a way so that we can access that information at, as I said, no cost to Kansas, but for the benefit of Kansans. And with that, if there are no questions, I'll sit till there are.
Thank you. We'll reserve questions for at the end after all three conferees. So next is Lieutenant Tim Greenwood from the Hayes Police Department. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct, sir.
Welcome
Thank you,
to
Mr.
committee.
Sheriff and committee for having me here today. I'm Lieutenant Tim Greenwood with the Hayes Police Department, and I'm here representing the Kansas Peace Officer Association as the current president for the KPOA. I'll give you a little bit of facts and statistics about law enforcement in the state of Kansas, also to discuss primarily staffing and training. For those that don't know, we have 425 agencies in the state of Kansas, law enforcement agencies, and we have 8,325 officers, whether it be a sheriff's deputy or police officer or law enforcement officer. Of those, it's important, of those agencies, it's important to keep in mind that 50% have 5 or fewer officers, and 2/3 have 10 or fewer officers. 70% have 10 or fewer officers in the state of Kansas. So we're doing primarily with small agencies in the state of Kansas. With that said, we have a very strong culture for training. That biggest foundation for that is the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center. Its main campus is in Yoder, Kansas, right outside Hutchinson. And there are also satellite regional training centers that have been dispersed throughout the state from the KLETC that really helps benefit those smaller agencies with quality training. Last year alone, the KLETC had 235 training sessions, logged nearly 3,000 training hours for a law enforcement officer, and currently has 12,000 enrollments. So obviously we have officers enrolled in more classes, multiple classes. But training, again, is imperative, that when we're out there doing the job, that we have the ability and the foresight to handle the situations that come upon us. We're not supermen, super ladies. We have to know what to do when we get to those situations, so training is critical. And the Kansas Law Enforcement Training Center, funding them to continue to provide us that quality training is imperative as well. The state has stood up recently an accreditation program. We have multiple agencies involved in that state accreditation program. So we're operating in best police practices. Training demands are high on law enforcement, and something I think that would be imperative for you to be guarded against is often we have well-meaning intentions for mandatory training for police officers. For example, we think that police officers need 8 hours of de-escalation training in the state. So somebody will try to push forward a bill requiring that of every police officer. Problem is that continues to stack up, and the training needs I may have in Hays, Kansas, may be completely different than the training needs that Sheriff Easter has in Sedgwick County. So we ask that you continue to permit local agencies to manage their training curriculum and what we need to do to continue within the state to be in best police practices and get our officers where they need to be. That's very important. Staffing continues to be a concern. We're starting to see a bump over staffing of the post-COVID era, where we were significantly down on numbers. We're starting to see some new hires, and those numbers come up. We believe most agencies are about 10 to 15% understaffed for where they should be. Something to keep in mind there is staffing is not only critical for agencies to provide services within that community, but it's, as Chief Atterbury discussed on the mental health and mental wellness for officers, the shorter an agency is, the more cumulative that stress is on those officers, going to more calls and more cases they have to work, and it just continues to build. So more resources are often needed. Retention of officers is critical. From the time a police officer vacates a position to the time a suitable replacement is in place and actively taking cases is often about a year, between the rigorous standards of hiring, between the training at the basics law enforcement training center, as well as what we call the field training officer program, riding with a senior officer and learning how to do the job. That's often a year. So it's important that we continue that, retain the officers that we have on the street, and we stop losing them to civilian employment. Right now, we seem to have a gap in the 5 to 7 year officer range. What that means is, well, we have supervisors and we have administrators. We have brand new officers doing the job, but that are just hired on and learning the position. But that gap where we had those field training officers seems to be short. So we're having newer officers having to train the brand new officers. So that can be problematic. And it's imperative that we continue to keep those 5 to 7 year officers. One way we can do that is through benefits. I'd like to touch on retirement, for example. There's only a third of law enforcement officers in the state of Kansas under regular capers and are not under KPNF. KPNF is a much more robust retirement plan, and it helps officers prepare for the future. The capers 3, tier 3, it's simply not a good plan. And, you know, it leads to officers looking for their future and often leaving to go to civilian employment. Capers needs a cost of living allowance. We haven't had a COLA since 1998, and that definitely needs to be something to keep in mind is as inflation is going through the roof, and you all are feeling it too. Everything from going and buying a hamburger for lunch to buying a car, the prices are not what they used to. So the officers that have served and have retired, and initially the money was there for, or planned for, COLAs, that has not been funded, and it's something that really needs addressed. Salary and benefits are always a concern, and anything that you can do to help promote the retention of officers, to help fill that gap, is greatly appreciated. And with that, I'll step back and stand for questions. Thank you again.
Thank you to all three conferees. We'll now open it up for questions by the committee. Representative Smith.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Lieutenant, you said they're on KPNF or Capers 3. Now, a new officer, is he going to be automatically in Capers 3? Or is there a way for them to get in KPNF?
With my understanding, sir, the decision of whether they're going to be in Capers 3 or KPNF largely comes down to the agency they're working for and that city government, whether they're going to enroll in KPNF for that officer.
Thank you.
Yeah. Representative James.
On your KPNF, it's quite a bit more expensive, isn't it? For the, say for our county and down in Lynn, I think we just did the whole study. The study itself was several thousand, and I noticed they took it on, but it's quite a bit different in pay, right?
It is different pay. The officer does put more in. The agency or the city or entity,
Yeah.
the county, does put more in. But I can assure you it's an investment, and officers, whether it's lateral movement or whether it's hiring on, they compare what retirement program it is.
And that's why we did it, I think, because we know the counties to our north had already done it, and we can see the benefit difference was there. It's just the amount of money they had to come up with, not me.
And I would love to defer that to probably Chief or Ed.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The chair cautioned me in a friendly way before the meeting that the less questions I ask, the sooner we're out of here. I don't want to disappoint anyone, so I brought a few, with your leave, Mr. Chair. Let's back up for just a second to this matter of KPNF and so on. Lieutenant Greenwood, I think that we actually probably have 3 retirement plans at least kind of floating around for law enforcement officers. We have cities or counties that choose to go into KPNF, and it costs more money, both typically for the county, but also the contribution, I believe, from the officer as well. But the benefits are richer. Is that generally correct?
Yes, sir.
And I don't mean by saying rich that they're too high. No, they're too low. Second, we have capers because some municipalities or counties decided not to go KPNF, and some of their officers, at least in some instances, are on the same sort of capers that those of us in the legislature are eligible for. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, sir.
And those benefits aren't quite as favorable. Is that your understanding?
Yes, sir.
And so when you're talking about Capers 3, I think what you're saying is in municipalities, counties, et cetera, who've gone with the Capers plan, and after the changes we made in the legislature about 8 or 10 years ago, the benefits for people who are new hires just aren't good enough to make it a strong incentive to stay with the employer. They're more mobile, they're more likely to go someplace that does have KPNF for their members, or perhaps to another state where there's a better benefit plan. Is that kind of the thrust of what you've been explaining?
Yes, sir. From the officers that we know that are in the Capers 3 plan. They're desperate to find employment that has a better plan for them. It's simply not enough, especially in a field, and not to get into the weeds, but this is not an easy job, and I'm not suggesting there is an easy job out there, but there's a reason why retirement comes early. Old guys like me shouldn't be wrestling guys in bar fights. So there's a reason for that early retirement necessity, but if the funds aren't there, we have to find something else to do.
Well, old guys like me shouldn't be, whether we're legislators or not, shouldn't be getting into bar fights either. Maybe we can somehow change our pension plan and dissuade people from doing that. I just touched a third rail in politics. The third, though, option is, I suppose, fourth option is, city and county, they don't have to have a retirement plan, I don't think. I think they can leave you out in the cold. I don't know of anybody who's doing that. But we do have cities like Wichita who have their own, I believe, retirement plan for officers. And I see the sheriff who once probably participated in that plan nodding in the affirmative. And that includes the drop and some other things that, at least for the guys, and they were all guys, that I graduated from college with, kept him at the Wichita Police Department for additional years because of the drop, which is a deferred payment plan for salary.
I'm glad you mentioned that.
I thought you might want to address that.
I do appreciate that, the drop program. I know some agencies, and I know our agency has looked to that to help keep quality officers and training and administration and out there doing the job. So that is an exceptional program, and would love to see that expanded as well.
So would I. Mr. Chair, I make a biennial disclosure. For whatever reason, I'm still an active member of the Kansas Peace Officers Association. I haven't qualified for membership 12, 13 years, something like that, but I guess my credit card stayed good.
Well, I appreciate that, sir.
But that's my disclosure of interest. I no longer belong to the trial lawyers. I no longer belong to the Kansas Bar because I'm retired, but somehow the $30 or whatever it is from KPOA keeps showing up. So, and I'm happy to keep paying as long as you'll have me. I did have another question, but maybe we should not, but actually for Sheriff Easter, but maybe we should defer to others.
We'll come back to you.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Vice Chair Ressman, did you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chief Atterbury, I think the insurance commissioner has introduced a bill that involves real-time insurance information.
He may have. I'm not aware of it. I know Representative Turner was working on that for a bit.
I got a phone call back in December from the insurance commissioner's office, and they were mentioning they were going to introduce a bill. I don't know if they have or not, but. It is out now. Okay, so it is. So there's something.
It's out now.
That's one more thing we can accomplish, I guess. All right, thank
Okay. Representative Barrett.
A question for the sheriff. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Sheriff, for showing up. I had a quick question about, you'd mentioned after 3 burglaries is what it takes before someone finally gets sent to prison. And I think we see that in a lot of crimes. My question for you is, the Sentencing Commission came in, and they're talking about the projected, how quickly it's going to come when our prisons get full. On the federal level, a lot of federal agencies have worked with county sheriff's offices, particularly in smaller agencies, such as Coffee, Osage, Lynn, and Bourbon. When they're building their jails, they build them bigger than they need because they know that the federal government will send inmates their way, and that way it can generate revenue, so it's a plus-plus on both sides. When we get to that point, when our prison population surpasses what we can hold at the state level, do you see that as a potential alternative for holding inmates, local counties getting compensated for holding those inmates?
Yeah, I think that is something that, the Sheriff's Association and the sheriffs in general would entertain, being that we house the most people outside of our agency, and we've built jails for other communities because of our population size. So I know that other sheriffs are always calling, going, hey, do you have any inmates you can send us? Because they're going to bill us and they get money out of it. So I think that that's something that would be a very good discussion to have, to see if the sheriffs would be amicable with housing prisoners that should be in state prison, but being compensated for that, much like the federal government does.
Representative Smith.
Sheriff, if I could. Capers 3, KPNF, do all of them, you have to work till you're 52, 54, 62?
Yeah, it's based upon age and the years of service. And so there's 3 systems right now that are in play, at least with employees of mine. So it's Capers 2. So I still have people on Capers 2. KPNF, we're a KPNF department for all of our commission sites, so everybody that works that carries a gun. All of our detention is either Capers 2 or Capers 3 when that came around 4 or 5 years ago. Big differences between Capers 2 and Capers 3. Capers 3, you have to work until you can collect Social Security, so you're talking 65. I hire a lot of 19 and 20-year-olds. And at the end of your time, you get about 37% of your paycheck. We're not going to have anybody retire under Capers 3, and they leave for other, either other agencies that offer KPNF for them or other entities within the community. And so Capers 3 is something that really, we've talked about this for about 3 or 4 years since it started. We really have to look at that system because KDOC then has a different system. So the folks that are watching the prisoners in state prisons have a different system where it's better than Capers 3, not quite like KPNF. So there's really 4 different systems depending where you work at.
One more, if I could.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. You know, there's a little talk. They want to move the Capers 3 teachers to Capers 2. But I feel like we need to move everybody. If we're going to move anybody, we ought to move everybody to Capers 2 and not pick a certain group because everybody else needs it just as much as they do. So, but now the Capers 2 people, it's a point system, like, so if you reach 85, is it, or what?
Yeah, it's, I can't remember, I'm not on the system because I came from the police department and being a sheriff, you could get voted out in 4 years, which means I'm not vested in KPNF. But yes, it's based upon age, and most of the time what I see from our folks is it's around 52 and you get about 40 points for your service. So they're doing about 36 years, and, you know, 52 or older, and then you've garnered enough points to be able to retire. And, you know, back to your other question, yeah, we were lumped into this because of the legislature wanted to move teachers off of Capers 2. There was really no discussion about how that affected everybody else. So if there's any discussion about moving teachers back, we need to be in that discussion because that's how we got in this place in the first place.
One more, please. Thank you. Something I don't understand. I have a friend in Pittsburgh that owns a construction company, and somebody stole $800 worth of materials, and they caught him. But because it was under a certain amount of money, they just let him go. And maybe it's on their record, but still, they don't take him in. Why so much? I mean,
so when I first was a police officer with the city of Wichita in 1989, that threshold between what's a misdemeanor and a felony was $500. Over the years, the legislatures have moved that up. Is it $1,500 now? Yeah, so you have to steal more than $1,500 worth of property for it to be a felony. Everything else is a misdemeanor. And so when you're talking about $1,500 worth of shoplift stuff, that's at their cost, not at retail value. So the $800 that you're talking about, that's a misdemeanor crime.
thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Carmichael.
How did you know not to go far, Sheriff?
Go far.
You're starting to sit
Oh,
down.
'cause
Then he
you said
called
it
out
earlier.
my name, and you immediately returned to the podium knowing that
You
I
said you
wouldn't
had a
let-
question for me.
that I wouldn't let my favorite sheriff get away without at least a question
I
or
understand.
two. Just following up, though, initially with Representative Smith, I understand people get upset when they have a bicycle stolen off their front porch, and it doesn't become priority number one for the Sedgwick County Sheriff's Office. Not that they don't investigate, but I mean, let's face it, fentanyl, armed robbery, burglary, all those other things oftentimes come first. And my presumption is if we gave you enough money, you would be happy to devote a detective to every misdemeanor theft and track it down, but you have other priorities. Is that kind of fair?
Yeah, everything's prioritized. So, you know, absolutely on the property crimes, if it reaches the level of a felony, then that's a priority. Then crimes that are misdemeanors. With the sheriff, our sheriff's office, we investigate all of those, though. Those are all given to detectives. Now, sometimes, you know, the citizens don't like the outcome because you're talking a minimal fine and kind of a slap on the wrist on misdemeanors, and out you go. And so that's sometimes the frustration citizens have.
Sure. I want to come back, though, closer to your testimony. PTSD, this has been an issue that I think law enforcement and other first responders have been trying to get compensation under the work comp laws for what you see in the performance of your duty. I think immediately about a case out on East Central that actually went to the state Supreme Court where an officer's partner was killed in front of his face, and an attempt was made to get work comps for therapy and some assistance, and the bottom line was, no, you have to have a physical injury. Even a paperclip cut would suffice. Is that kind of what you're talking about here?
So that was Chief Atterbury's.
I apologize. If I might, Mr. Chair, could I hear from?
You may.
Okay, and
That is-
I do have one last thing for the sheriff, but
That is my understanding. There has to be a physical injury before the PTSD can be lumped in.
do you know what we need to do? Do you have any thought as to what we need to do different to finally get this passed? Because we talk about it forever. Is there something different this year or something I could do or we could do to help from your perspective?
I believe it was 2 years ago, we had a bill. We could revisit that and discuss that. I think the solution's been found. It just needs to be
The House
resurrected and
Commerce
discussed.
Committee meets at the same time we do, so we're not on the committee you need, but I appreciate you raising that. Final thing, Mr. Chair, is of some importance. Sheriff Easter, Wichita, Sedgwick County, I think in their legislative agenda, have talked about getting more resources for medical care at the county jail. Does that ring any bell with you? Because if it doesn't, I'm not going to go down this road and we'll be fine. I didn't understand what they meant. I didn't understand what they meant in their agenda either. I'll ask them rather than you. I thought you might know.
I don't know, sir.
Keep up the good work, Sheriff. I appreciate it. I sleep better at night with you on the job.
I appreciate it, sir. Thank you.
Yes, Representative Schlingensieben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Did we have a bill last session that with regard to the PTSD ask?
You may.
Ed Klump, again, representing the three associations. Yes, we did. We've had a bill the last 2 or 3 years. We had a hearing on the Senate side 2 years ago, and there will be a bill introduced this year again over in the House side this time. That'll be coming out shortly. We're working on that right now. Same bill. It just expands it to where you don't have to have the physical injury. Oklahoma has passed theirs now. I think Missouri's passed theirs. So several states around us now have expanded that. I think the count is up somewhere between 25 and 30 states provide first responder coverage for PTSD without a physical injury now. and we will have a bill.
This one just astonishes me because, as you know, I've been to a lot of places with our officers here in Topeka, and the things that, you know, you folks see out there and experience are really something else. And to get that kind of mental health assistance, I think is absolutely crucial, not just for retaining staff, but for the well-being and judgment of the officers involved as they go forward with their careers.
And if I may, I want to stress there's a difference between post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is a very well-defined diagnosis that's done by a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and it involves several symptoms that go on over a period of time. I think it's at least 60 days, and it has to be a combination of, I believe it's 3 of those symptoms, to the point where it affects your life function. So there's not a lot of people diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and part of that reason is because we do a lot of programming up front now, trying to address the post-traumatic stress. You all have helped us with that by developing and refining our peer support teams and providing us with the legislation to do that. And we're doing more now to address those needs at the time when a critical incident occurs where first responders are more susceptible to developing post-traumatic stress. I can tell you, I doubt if you can talk to a law enforcement officer, a firefighter, or a medic that has been in the business very long that hasn't suffered some level of post-traumatic stress. Fortunately, very few of us reach the disorder part. So it's not as big a number as I think some people fear it will be to add that to the work comp, because it's a very, very narrow defined advanced problem with post-traumatic stress.
I was just going to ask one follow-up question. How do you, departments have been doing an awful lot more, including here in Johnson County, to address the stress part, even so before it gets to the disorder part. But to what extent do you feel like the culture within the law enforcement agencies is changing? I mean, as you know, any weakness that an officer shows could cause trouble, you know, with colleagues. And do you feel like there is a real visible shift in the culture to be a little more less defensive about these things, a little more understanding and proactive?
Yeah. Let Sheriff answer that.
So absolutely, there needs to be a shift in law enforcement. So such as some of us in this room, the culture for law enforcement there in the 90s and the 2000s, if you've seen something, you didn't show emotion, you didn't talk about it, and if you did, you were seen as weak by other law enforcement officers. So what that caused was high divorce rates, alcoholism, suicide rates, those type of things. 3 years ago, we've started a program, and it's the only one here in any law enforcement agencies in the state of Kansas. There's different types of programs, but we've gone full tilt into health and wellness. And so what that means is that we have 69 people within the sheriff's office that are peer support trained. So the legislation that you passed in reference to peer support and kind of the laws surrounding that, those peer support people can be contacted at any time, and they're spread out throughout the agency to our employees that have maybe an issue at work that they're struggling with, family, marriage, whatever it might be, and they can't talk to administration about it unless they're a threat to themselves or others. Then all bets are off. They have to tell somebody. We've taken that further into a program now where we have a lot of programs within health and wellness, but we hired our own therapists. And so within Sedgwick County, I have a full-time therapist and then a intern that provides therapy to all of our employees free of cost. And she's extremely busy, that's why we had to get an intern. But here's the benefit we've seen out of it. During COVID and shortly after that, we had 8 incidents where folks were just overworked and overwhelmed inside the facility. They were working 12 to 16-hour shifts, 8 days a week. 8 incidents where we had to transport our own people to the hospital because they were in a mental health crisis at work. Since the inception of this, and since we've really, in the last year and a half, 2 years, have really put this into motion. We haven't had one. We used to be 127 deputies down inside the facility. I'm 2. And so our retention rates have skyrocketed because this younger generation, they want to feel valued, not just paid. Do you care about me and my well-being? And what we're seeing out of this is because we have a health or a fitness program, all this other stuff, we're seeing deputies that care more about their health, both body and mind, and our retention rates have gone up. There's other agencies across Kansas that do different parts of that to try to help. So that's where you're seeing the culture shift. There's some old fogies like myself that are still employed that don't believe in it. That's fine. You probably need it, is what we tell them, because we see how they act or some of the stuff they say. We just ask them not to badmouth it and give the other people the opportunity, because that was always the stigma, is if you went and saw somebody to get help, you got some mental problems or you're weak. And that's not the message we send anymore.
Does confidentiality apply both in the peer support and I'm sure in the other that you've developed on that basis, but in the peer support especially?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sure. I have a couple questions. They pertain to the juvenile justice system. I'm not sure which of the conferees. Yes, thank you, sir. I'm on page 4 of 6, and you mentioned this too. Okay, well, all right. I don't know if you need that, but in any event, it has to do with the repeat offender, juvenile repeat offenders.
Yes.
And could you just elucidate a little further and give us some more details about what's the problem you see in the current juvenile justice system in connection with that? Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that the modifications that were made a few years ago have, in large part, worked, but I don't think those were designed for the worst of the worst, the ones that we come into contact with repeatedly. Probably about 5 to 7% of those offenders. They're still a problem, and they get shuffled around the state, whether they be in custody or put into foster homes. They continue to be a problem for us, but and I don't know how to fix it, but under the current program, it's not successful.
Thank you. Can you give us an example of how that might play out, just a hypothetical, something that you've experienced so we understand more practically how that happens?
We had a child, he wasn't in Bel Air, but he was in Wichita, right on the border, and he had a habit of stealing vehicles. And he stole a school bus, he stole a backhoe, he stole a delivery truck for a glass company. I think there was a bulldozer in there too. And eventually, we raised enough cane because he wasn't doing it in Wichita, he was doing it in Bel Air. And so we raised cane with his I don't know, not social worker, but the agent in charge of dealing with his case.
On probation?
I think he was involved in so many different cases. I don't know that he was on probation. A lot of them were working through the system, but he was eventually sent out to Ford County and removed from that location with that group of people that he was hanging around, where he was acting out with them. And then I believe out in Ford County, he just found a replacement set of people and started acting out again. He's one of those 5% that just make it really difficult for law enforcement, makes it difficult for our statistics because they're committing, felony crimes, and in some cases, dangerous to the community. So is there some place to put that child other than just a group home or a foster care home? I would hope that would be an option in the future.
And on that particular case, do you know if there was the option of detaining him or putting him in
He can only be temporarily detained till he can be released back into, at that point, it was a group home.
Right. So, as I understand, we don't have group homes any longer. Was this something back more than 10 years ago.
5, 6 years ago. But that was my example of that
Yeah.
repeated problem where we didn't have a solution. And if you're asking about in the last couple of years, no, I don't have a good example for you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have Sheriff Easter. I think he wants to also jump in on this one.
The statement on the group homes, we do have those.
Okay.
We got 2 of them in Sedgwick County.
Yeah, okay. And who are they designed?
So
designed
it used to
for.
be St. Francis was one of them. That contract, they had a lot of issues with folks that should have been detained at JDF, but were placed into their custody. And so the sexual assaults on other kids, staff on battery staffs, all that kind of stuff. So they lost the contract, it went to somebody else, and now it's out by Lake Afton, so it's under our jurisdiction, and we're making calls out there at least once a week. And it's still some of these kids that probably don't belong in that home. They belong actually in a jail-type setting. And so, you know, the Wichita Police Department talks about this quite extensively because they have quite a few kids. They've committed drive-bys, have done shootings during robberies, those type of things, and they're back out in the community. And then they're dealing with them again.
Is that because the law doesn't permit judges to detain them, or what's the reason they're not?
They're
put into
supposed to be placed into services, and most of the time they're removed from the home, placed into services that the county has to provide through their juvenile service people. But at the same time, these kids are still committing violent crimes. I mean, I'm not talking property crimes from what we see as much, or complaints about as much. It's the violent crime. And we are responding to it it's the old Kings camp out by Lake Afton, where we've had a couple kids that sexually assaulted other kids that shot at people, but they're placed in this home.
And is it just the case that the judges aren't using the authority they have to detain these folks, or is it that they don't have that authority, or do you know?
My understanding is a lot of it is they don't have that authority anymore because a lot of these kids do not have the criminal records prior.
Okay. Yes, Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm disappointed to hear your report, Sheriff, because I thought that repeat juvenile offenders who are committing serious crimes, and I think drive-bys are serious crimes, I thought that District Attorney Bennett could refer those kids to the adult court, and if they're so recalcitrant that the juvenile system can't offer anything for them, that we've got a place to put them, to isolate them from society. Am I wrong on that? Is Mark just being lazy, which I don't think is the case?
I can guarantee you
What's going on there?
you're talking about adjudication, and most of the time adjudication is reserved for kids that murder people. I don't see a lot of adjudication. I'm not sure they can do it for lesser crimes as drive-bys and shooting at people.
I'm not sure either, but my friend Mr. Munholland, Bill, Jason over here, one of these guys will look this up and let me know better. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your patience, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Klump, did you have something to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ed Klump with the associations. I want to go back to when the change happened in the juvenile justice system, and I was a member of the panel that studied that over in interim leading up to the bill that made these changes. And there was myself, I was the only law enforcement officer on that group. There was one district attorney that was on that group. And we repeatedly kept reminding them that what they were doing was going to work very well and very needed for 95% of these kids, but they weren't leaving the tools we needed to deal with the 5%. We were guaranteed we'd have a chance to speak on that. We never got that opportunity. And so the bill came out, and it's my belief that that's exactly what happened. When that bill was passed, we were incarcerating a tremendous number of kids in the state juvenile facilities, way more than should have been there, and they were staying much longer than they should have stayed there. And that was very clear from the data, and we were all very supportive of the changes for that 95%. The problem with the 5% is the system doesn't ramp up fast enough when you have these repeat offenders, especially violent offenders. And so it's not until they have, many cases, I don't want to put a number on it, but multiple cases, that then people start saying, okay, what we're doing doesn't work, and so we got to do something different, rather than ramping that up when they're in those first phases of repeat offenders. All of us want to believe that we can correct a child and get them on the right path if we reach them early enough. The problem is there are some that either lack the capacity to do that, or they haven't had the adult support they needed as they grew up to have that built into them. And it's not an easy fix. So what we hear from our sheriffs and our chiefs many times is these cases where you have this multiple repeat offender, you take them to juvenile intake, they apply the tool that they use to assess whether they should be held or not. The tool says this is a magic number. They don't quite reach that, so they're sent back home. They're sent back to wherever they came from, back into the same environment they've been in doing these repeat offenses. And, the answer's not easy, but there has to be a better way to do this. I remember one case shortly after the changes went into effect where we had an offense by a juvenile using a firearm, actually discharged a firearm, and they didn't rank high enough to keep them into custody. Now, we can go to the court and ask for that tool to be overridden, but it's not going to happen very often, and it shouldn't happen very often. But I think what we did is, and it was good, and actually the people promoting this actually talked about this is going to work for 95% of the kids. It has worked for 95% of the kids. We don't want to go back to where it was because that wasn't working. But the problem is, and I talk about this a lot up here, that legislation took the pendulum off one side of the clock and banged it against the other. It didn't bring it back to the middle to give us, the prosecutors and the courts, the tools they need to act quickly on these juveniles who we all know are repeat offenders and aren't going to stop until something more heavily happens. And I think somebody mentioned the ability to put them into adult court. We'd like to avoid that. We'd like to address this issue sometime before they reach that point where the only alternative is to put them in an adult court and then put them in an adult prison. And so that's the issue. There's been testimony given over the years by judges, by prosecutors, by law enforcement about this problem, and unfortunately, we couldn't find any ear willing to listen to those issues. I don't know what the answer is, but we have a lot of very intelligent people in the juvenile justice system in this state that I think could find the right answer, very narrowly crafted out so it only applies to those really troubled kids that we keep seeing over and over again, and do it quicker so we have a chance of rehabilitating them before we dump them in the adult system.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
About that.
Yeah, I understand. We'll talk. Yeah. Representative.
So the legislation we're talking about, for those who are new, is Senate Bill 367 and the shift that represented. And I know that, I want to say last 2 years, we heard plenty of testimony from caseworkers who are literally terrified of this 5% that they are forced to work with. And some of these kids are going back into foster care and molesting other children and doing other things. And so there is a real need to address this in some way. I thought we were working on a bill last time, but I guess it didn't pass. So it would be good for us to give this some much needed attention, because when we're talking about not having enough people to do case management or not enough safe placements in foster care parents, this is one of the reasons that people are fleeing, providing those services, because they're really afraid for themselves and their families.
Yes, that's what I keep hearing too. So we will continue to look into this issue as we proceed with the session. All right, any other questions from the committee for any of the conferees? If not, we'll adjourn the meeting and see everybody tomorrow.